Before thermostats and central heating, people stayed warm through ingenuity, materials science, and a practical understanding of heat that most people today have completely lost. Here are 15 old-school heating methods everyone used before electricity. Method 15. The bed warmer and warming pan. Before anyone climbed into bed on a cold winter night, the bedding had to be pre-warmed. Otherwise, sliding between cold sheets meant spending the first 20 minutes of what should have been sleep shivering until body heat caught up. The warming pan solved this problem with elegant simplicity. A warming pan was a covered metal pan, typically brass or copper, with a long wooden handle, filled with hot coals or embers from the fireplace. The pan was slid between the sheets and moved slowly across the entire surface of the bed, warming the linen without scorching it. Done properly, a warming pan passage left the sheets genuinely warm to the touch when the occupant climbed in. Done carelessly, it left a scorched hole in the bedding and a lesson about rushing. The practice was documented across Europe from the 16th century onward and remained in common use in cold climate regions well into the 19th century. Queen Elizabeth I's household accounts mention warming pans as standard bedroom equipment. In wealthier households, a servant managed this task. In ordinary households, whoever went to bed last took care of it. The heated soapstone variation, a flat slab of soapstone heated in or near the fire and then wrapped in cloth, served the same purpose and had the advantage of retaining heat longer than coals while producing no smoke or ember risk. Soapstone's unusually high specific heat capacity, meaning it stores more heat per unit of mass than most common materials, made it the superior choice for sustained warmth. The same properties that made it valuable as a bed warmer made it attractive as a cooking surface and as a material for wood stoves, which is why soapstone stoves remain commercially available today at the premium end of the market. Method 14. Heated bricks and foot warmers. The heated brick is perhaps the most democratic heating technology ever devised. It requires nothing except a brick, a heat source, and the knowledge that brick holds heat for a long time. A standard clay brick heated in or near a fire for an hour will retain useful warmth for 2 to 4 hours, depending on ambient temperature and how well it is insulated. Heated bricks were used in bed, wrapped in cloth to prevent burns, at the feet in cold church pews, inside carriages on winter journeys, and at work surfaces where prolonged cold exposure was a problem. The foot warmer, a small perforated metal or wooden box containing a small ceramic or metal container of hot coals, was a refinement of the same principle specifically designed for use in churches, schoolhouses, and conveyances. American church records from colonial New England document parishioners bringing foot warmers to Sunday services as a matter of routine, and the wooden schoolroom foot warmers of the period appear frequently in household inventory records. The physics of the heated brick are straightforward. Thermal mass stores heat energy and releases it slowly. This is the same principle behind the Russian masonry heater, behind radiant floor heating systems, and behind the modern recommendation to keep large containers of water in a root cellar to moderate temperature swings. The brick just happens to be the most compact, accessible, and immediately available version of the concept. Before we continue, I prepared a step-by-step ebook that's currently on sale, packed with practical survival systems and simple life hacks. It's designed to help you save money, stay prepared, and improve everyday safety in a simple, realistic way. You can access it instantly while the discounted price is still available. You can find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. Method 13. The Hippocaust. Underfloor heating from ancient Rome. The Hippocaust system was the underfloor heating technology of ancient Rome, and it was sophisticated enough that a modern engineer looking at the design would have no fundamental complaints about the approach. The word comes from the Latin hippocaustum, itself from the Greek hypo, under, and kaien, to burn, which describes it accurately enough. The system worked by raising the floor of a room on a grid of short brick pillars, typically about 2 feet high, creating a continuous cavity beneath the floor. A furnace, called a prefernium, was built outside the room and stoked with wood. Hot gases from the furnace circulated beneath the floor through the pillar cavity, then rose through hollow tile pipes built into the walls, exiting through vents near the ceiling. The floor above the cavity, typically thick tile or stone, absorbed the heat and radiated it upward into the occupied space, while the wall flues distributed heat through the vertical surfaces as well. Excavated Roman villas from Britain to Turkey show hippocaust systems as a standard feature of any structure built for comfort. The baths of Caracalla in Rome, completed in 217 AD, used hypocaust systems across bathing spaces that could accommodate 1,600 bathers simultaneously. Legionary fortresses in Roman Britain had hypocaust-heated bathhouses as standard military facilities. The system required continuous stoking and a dedicated furnace operator, which made it a technology of wealth and institutional resources rather than ordinary households. But its underlying engineering logic, heating a thermal mass from below and letting the mass radiate warmth into occupied space, is the same principle that modern radiant floor heating uses today. When architects say radiant floor heating is the most comfortable heating method available, they're validating a conclusion Roman engineers reached 2,000 years ago. Method 12. Peat and turf fires. In regions where wood was scarce, Ireland, Scotland, the Scandinavian lowlands, the English fens, and parts of northern Europe, peat was the primary fuel for domestic heating throughout most of recorded history and well into the 20th century. Peat is partially decomposed organic material accumulated in waterlogged bogs over thousands of years. Cut into blocks, dried, and burned, it provides a slow, hot, long-lasting fire with a distinctive earthy smell that remains culturally associated with the landscapes where it was used. The Irish turf fire in particular occupies a specific place in cultural memory. Households maintained the fire continuously, damping it at night with a covering of ash to preserve the embers, then coaxing it back in the morning, rather than relighting from cold daily. This continuous fire maintenance kept the chimney warm and the kitchen habitable without the effort and fuel cost of repeatedly lighting and building a new fire. The expression, "banking the fire," for this nighttime management practice persists in English today. Irish author and poet Sumas O'Sullivan wrote of the turf fire, "There is nothing quite like it for warmth that penetrates rather than merely surrounds." It's a useful distinction. Peat fires burn at lower temperatures than wood and produce more radiant heat relative to visible flame, which is exactly the quality that makes them effective for sustained room heating without the peaks and valleys of a wood fire. Peat cutting was an annual community event in many parts of Ireland and Scotland, with turves cut in spring, stacked to dry through summer, and brought in before winter. The peat bank, the specific bog location assigned to a household by tradition, was a form of property right passed through generations. Method 11. Tallow and wax candles as secondary heat. A candle's primary function was light, but in a cold room, heat was a secondary output that was not trivial. A single paraffin or tallow candle produces approximately 80 BTUs of heat per hour. That number sounds modest until you put it in context. A room full of candles for a formal dinner produced meaningful warmth in addition to light. A candelabra with 12 candles produces nearly 1,000 BTUs, roughly equivalent to a small electric space heater on its lowest setting. Pre-industrial households understood intuitively what the numbers confirm. Candles were heat sources as well as light sources, and the candle arrangement in a room was partially a thermal management decision. Grouping candles to warm a specific seating area, keeping candles in the bedroom through the evening before sleep, using candle lanterns in enclosed spaces where the heat could accumulate rather than disperse. These were practical applications of a principle that was never formally articulated but was widely understood through experience. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, were the everyday candle of ordinary households. They burned less cleanly than beeswax, produced more smoke and odor, and dripped more aggressively, but they were dramatically cheaper and could be made at home from a byproduct of the autumn slaughter. Beeswax candles burned cleaner and longer and were used in churches and wealthy households. The quality of a household's candles was a fairly direct indicator of its economic status. Method 10. The ceramic tile stove, Kachelofen. The Kachelofen, the ceramic tile stove developed in German-speaking Central Europe starting in the 15th century, represents perhaps the most thermally sophisticated approach to wood-burning room heating ever developed for household use. The basic concept is simple, but the execution is remarkable. A firebox surrounded by a massive, thick ceramic tile shell that absorbs heat from a hot, fast fire and then releases it slowly and evenly over many hours. A properly built Kachelofen is fired intensely for 2 to 3 hours and then left to radiate. The thermal mass of the ceramic structure, which can weigh several hundred kilograms, stores enough energy from that brief, hot burn to heat the room for 12 to 24 hours. The surface temperature of the stove never gets hot enough to burn on contact. It is warm to the touch but not dangerous, which made it safe to place furniture and people close to it. Children could lean against it to warm up after coming in from cold outside without risk. The efficiency of a properly built kachelofen compares favorably with modern wood-burning systems. It extracts most of the heat from the combustion process through a complex internal labyrinth of channels that maximize contact between exhaust gases and tile mass before the gases exit the chimney. A well-built kachelofen achieves thermal efficiencies of 75 to 90%, compared to 10 to 20% for a standard open fireplace. Austrian architect and stove builder Norbert Robel described the kachelofen as a completely solved problem, a heating technology that reached its optimal form 5 centuries ago and has not been meaningfully improved since. The modern versions available from Austrian and German manufacturers are functionally identical in principle to those installed in Renaissance-era buildings. Method 9. The Russian masonry heater, pechka. The Russian masonry heater, the pechka, is functionally related to the kachelofen, but larger, more versatile, and more deeply integrated into the architecture and daily life of the households that used it. In traditional Russian farmhouses, the pechka occupied a central position in the main living space and served simultaneously as the room's heating system, the household's cooking appliance, the primary sleeping surface during the coldest months, and in some configurations, a bathing facility. The sleeping surface warrants specific attention. The pechka's top surface, after a firing cycle, maintained a temperature of roughly 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for many hours, warm enough to sleep comfortably on during winter nights when outdoor temperatures might be far below zero. Sleeping on top of the stove, rather than beside it or near it, was a practical warmth strategy that required no additional bedding beyond what was normal. The top shelf of a Russian pechka was the coveted sleeping spot for children and elderly family members. Warm, elevated, and most comfortable. Tolstoy and other Russian writers described this sleeping arrangement in the rural life they documented, making it a recognizable cultural detail for readers across generations. Like the kachelofen, the pechka was fired intensely with dry hardwood for 2 to 4 hours, and then used its stored thermal mass to radiate heat for the following 12 to 24 hours. Unlike the kachelofen, it incorporated a cooking surface and oven during the firing cycle, making the heat investment doubly productive, heating the room and cooking the food from a single fire. Method 8. Passive solar architecture. Passive solar heating is not a modern invention. The deliberate orientation of buildings to maximize solar heat gain in winter was practiced systematically in ancient Greece, studied and codified by architects in the classical period, and applied across cultures that experienced cold winters and abundant sunlight. The principle is simple: orient the main living spaces toward the south, maximize glazed or open surfaces on that south face, and use thermal mass to store the daytime heat for nighttime release. Socrates is documented by Xenophon as having described passive solar house design explicitly. Houses should be oriented so that the south side receives sun in winter while being shaded by overhanging eaves in summer when the sun is higher in the sky. This is basic solar geometry. The winter sun tracks low across the southern sky, the summer sun higher, and a building designed around this geometry captures heat when it's needed and avoids overheating when it isn't. Socrates was describing passive solar design in approximately 400 BC, which is slightly awkward for anyone who frames it as a modern innovation. Medieval monasteries in northern Europe were frequently sited with the cloister garden on the south side, creating a sheltered, south-facing outdoor space that was warmer than the surrounding landscape by several degrees. The glass-covered greenhouse, developed in the 17th century partly for botanical purposes and partly for exactly this thermal advantage, is a direct extension of the passive solar principle into an enclosed structure. Traditional Pueblo architecture in the American Southwest used passive solar principles with remarkable sophistication: south-facing room arrangements, thick adobe walls with high thermal mass, and elevated building positions to maximize winter sun exposure and minimize summer overheating. Method 7. Animal heat. This one requires a certain willingness to set aside modern sensibilities about cohabitation with livestock, because for most of human history, and specifically for most of the European peasant tradition that forms the background of much Western cultural memory, Sharing living space with animals in winter was a standard thermal management strategy rather than a sign of poverty. A cow produces approximately 2,000 BTUs of heat per hour as a byproduct of its metabolism. A pig produces roughly 400 to 600 BTUs per hour. A flock of 20 chickens produces a combined 2,000 BTUs or more. In a structure shared between the household and its animals, the longhouse design common across medieval Scandinavia, the Buron of the Auvergne in France, the traditional croft of Scotland, that animal heat was a meaningful fraction of the total heating load through winter. The longhouse design specifically placed the animal byre at one end of the structure and the human living quarters at the other, with a shared wall between them. Heat from the animals, and the body heat of the animals, rather than any form of fire, passively conducted through that shared wall and contributed to the habitability of the living space. The design was not accidental or incidental. It was a deliberate thermal strategy. This practice persisted in remote rural areas of Europe into the 20th century. Swiss alpine farmhouses, built to accommodate both family and cattle under a single large roof, were using the same thermal principle well into the 1900s. The cattle were shelter assets, not just food production assets. Method 6. Heated stones and fire pit cooking. The fire pit, used for heating and cooking in a central position within a structure, is the oldest form of indoor heating in human history. Archaeological evidence of intentional fire use inside structures dates to at least 400,000 years ago at Kizim Cave in Israel, and the arrangement of heating the enclosed space around a central fire, with the structure designed to retain heat while allowing smoke to escape, is the foundational architecture of human habitation in cold climates. The heated stone variation, stones heated in or beside a fire and then used as radiant heat sources within a dwelling, extends the fire's thermal output beyond its direct radiation radius. Hot stones arranged around the perimeter of a sleeping area or buried beneath a sleeping surface maintained warmth through the night after the fire was allowed to die down. The Finnish sauna, which is the most elaborate and culturally significant refinement of this approach, heats a massive pile of stones to very high temperatures and then uses those stones to maintain a hot, humid environment long after the fire is extinguished. The sweat lodge traditions of numerous Native American cultures use heated stones in exactly the same way. Stones heated outside, carried in carefully, and arranged in the center of an enclosed structure to produce heat and steam for ceremonial and therapeutic purposes. The mechanism is identical across cultures that had no contact with each other. Stone has thermal mass stores heat. Stored heat can be transported and released in a controlled environment. Method 5. The Franklin stove. Benjamin Franklin invented the Pennsylvania fireplace, later called the Franklin stove, in 1741, and while it didn't work exactly as he claimed in some respects, it represented a genuine attempt to apply scientific reasoning to a problem that most people addressed through tradition. Franklin's motivation was explicit. The open fireplace was spectacularly inefficient, sending the majority of combustion heat up the chimney rather than into the room. Franklin's design placed a cast iron baffle system inside a modified firebox that forced hot gases through a longer internal path before exiting to the chimney, extracting more heat from the combustion process. He also designed the firebox to radiate from both front and sides rather than only front, increasing the heated surface area facing the room. The design achieved some improvement over the standard open fireplace, though later analysis by David Rittenhouse found that Franklin's original design had a flaw in the exhaust system that limited its draft, and Rittenhouse's 1786 revision corrected this and produced a more functional version. Franklin refused to patent the stove, stating in his autobiography that he had benefited so much from others' inventions that he felt it appropriate to give this one freely to the public. Whether that was genuine philosophical principle or a practical acknowledgement that the design could have used more work is something historians have debated. The Franklin stove's lasting significance was the explicit application of thermal efficiency principles to domestic heating design. The idea that the same fuel should produce more usable heat through better engineering, rather than simply burning more fuel to compensate for waste. That conceptual shift, more than the specific design, influenced the subsequent development of improved wood stoves through the 19th century. Method 4. Coal grates and parlor stoves. Coal became the dominant urban heating fuel in Britain during the 17th century and in American cities through the 19th century, driven by its higher energy density than wood, its suitability for the grate designs that became standard in urban fireplaces, and the logistics of coal distribution through canals and later railroads. The shift from wood to coal in urban Britain was substantially complete by 1700 in London, driven partly by deforestation and partly by the development of coal mines in the north, connected to London through coastal shipping. The coal grate, a raised iron basket that held coal off the floor of the firebox, allowing air circulation beneath the fuel, was specifically adapted for coal combustion, which required better airflow than wood fires. A wood fire burns adequately on a flat hearth. A coal fire performs significantly better on a grate, where air reaches the fuel from below, as well as the sides. The parlor stove, which became a middle-class household standard in American homes through the 19th century, enclosed the combustion in a cast iron box that radiated heat from all surfaces, rather than only the front opening. Parlor stoves burning coal could maintain a room at comfortable temperature with considerably less attention and fuel than an equivalent open fireplace. A fire could be banked with coal overnight and would still be going in the morning, something impossible with an open wood fire. The social geography of the Victorian home was organized partly around which rooms had stoves or fireplaces. The parlor and the kitchen were heated. Bedrooms often were not. The pattern of household activity in winter clustered around the heat sources, which is why the kitchen was simultaneously the warmest and the most socially active room in most 19th century households. Method 3. Insulated clothing and layered dressing. Before buildings were routinely heated to the comfortable year-round temperatures that modern people expect, managing body warmth through clothing was not just an outdoor concern, it was an indoor one as well. Buildings in cold climates before the 20th century were heated to temperatures that modern standards would classify as barely comfortable. 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit in all but the rooms nearest the fire was entirely normal in well-to-do households, and lower than that in poorer ones. The response was heavier, more extensive indoor clothing than modern people wear in similar indoor conditions. The dressing gown, the heavy house coat, the multiple layers of petticoats in women's historical dress, the waistcoat and thick coat worn indoors. These were functional thermal management rather than fashion statements. When indoor temperatures routinely fall in the range that outdoor recreation gear is designed for, indoor clothing takes on characteristics of outdoor gear. Wool was the performance insulation material of the pre-industrial world for the same reasons it remains technically superior in many cold weather applications today. It traps air in its fiber structure for insulation, it retains roughly 60 to 80% of its insulating value when wet, and it resists compression. A person wearing multiple wool layers indoors in a 55-degree room is comfortable. A person in cotton layers in the same room is not, because cotton offers minimal insulation and loses the little it has when damp. And indoor humidity in a heated, occupied space damps cotton. The nightcap, now a comic archetype, was a practical wool hat worn to sleep in cold bedrooms. The head loses heat disproportionately quickly relative to body surface area, and a nightcap meaningfully reduced overnight heat loss in unheated bedrooms where the window might frost on the inside. Method 2. The Scottish box bed. The box bed, a sleeping space enclosed on all sides and the top by wooden panels, with a hinged or sliding door or curtain across the front, was a standard feature of Scottish and Scandinavian homes from the medieval period through the 19th century, and it solved the problem of sleeping in cold buildings with a simple but elegant architectural solution. The box bed worked on the same principle as the heat tent described in modern winter survival contexts. The occupant's body heat was trapped in a very small enclosed volume, the interior of the box, rather than being allowed to dissipate into the room. A person sleeping in a box bed was essentially sleeping in a wooden tent inside a house. The box itself provided insulation. The enclosed volume concentrated body heat, and the curtain or door at the front prevented cold room air from circulating through. The beds were sometimes built into the wall of the house itself, with the hearth on the adjacent wall, placing the sleeping space as close as possible to the primary heat source. In Scottish black houses, the traditional low stone dwellings of the Outer Hebrides, the box bed was positioned to share a wall with the central hearth, exploiting conducted heat through the wall structure, as well as the radiant heat from the fire face. Box beds frequently had drawers built into the base, the drawer bed, making use of the dead space under the sleeping surface for storage. The practicality of the design extended in every direction. It conserved space, concentrated warmth, provided storage, and could be closed during the day to present a tidy facade in a room that served multiple functions. The Scots were solving the open-plan living problem centuries before it became a design trend. Method 1. The central hearth and longhouse design. The central hearth, a fire built in the middle of the floor of an enclosed structure, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, is the oldest architectural heating technology in human history and the foundation of every subsequent development on this list. Every enclosed, fire-centered building design, from the Neolithic roundhouse to the Viking longhouse to the Native American longhouse of the Northeast to the Mongolian jeer, is a refinement of the same basic concept. The central position of the fire is not arbitrary. A fire against a wall heats primarily the space in front of it. A fire in the center heats the space all around it equally. In an enclosed structure where every occupant needs to be within the radiant range of the fire's warmth, the center is simply the most efficient position. The geometry of circular or oval building plans in many early cultures reflects the same logic. A circle encloses the maximum area relative to perimeter, which minimizes the heat-losing wall surface relative to the heated interior volume. The Viking longhouse, used across Scandinavia and the Norse diaspora from approximately 500 to 1200 AD, placed the hearth centrally in the main hall, with raised wooden benches along both long walls that served as seating by day and sleeping surfaces by night. The bench sleepers were at roughly the level of the fire, close to the floor where the warmest air was before convection carried it upward. And the central fire both heated the hall and provided light and a cooking surface simultaneously. A cow byre at one end, as noted elsewhere, contributed additional animal heat. The smoke management of these structures was more sophisticated than a hole in the roof might suggest. The roof pitch, the position and size of the smoke hole, and sometimes adjustable flaps or louvers controlled the draw of the fire and the distribution of smoke in a way that kept the occupied level of the hall reasonably clear while exhausting combustion products from the upper zone. It wasn't a perfect solution by any modern standard, but it was a systematic one, refined over centuries of use. As architectural historian James Graham Campbell noted of the Norse longhouse, this was not primitive housing. It was optimal housing for the climate, the available materials, and the social structure of the people who built it. Every feature served a function. If this look at how people kept warm before electricity gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It helps more people find this content. And subscribe to the channel for more history that's actually useful.